Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are going to be going over my small one-car garage workshop. I'm Clayton, the weekend builder. Let's get into it. So I've been working out of this two-car garage for the past couple years now, and I'm going to share with you what works, what I hate, and what I hope to improve in the future. I also want to talk about the differences of working in one side of a two-car garage versus having just a one-car garage that's solely dedicated to woodworking, and which I would rather have, because both options have their advantages and they also have their disadvantages. The very first thing that I want to talk about is the overall layout of my shop. Probably the most iconic part of any shop is the workbench. I made this workbench out of a recycled old desk that I made and 4x4s. And honestly, this workbench has been great. It is solid as a rock, heavy as can be. I mean, this thing is not going anywhere. So in the future, I'm probably going to refinish this desktop and put some solid wood around it as opposed to just random edge banding that's just coming off like that. So this workbench is really just a general purpose area. I don't build too many things. I actually have an assembly table for that, and I'll go over that in just a bit. But this really catches all of the stuff that I'm in the process of doing. If I have a lot of bits out, I'll typically keep those here. But it's also a more permanent home for things like my drill press or my belt sander and disc sander. You know, I was kind of debating whether or not I would even show you this because honestly, it's kind of embarrassing. This has just been a catch-all for everything for the past few years. So this definitely needs some attention. So that's probably going to be a future project. But right now, like I said, it's just a catch-all. So there's a lot of wasted potential right here, and I'll address that. I know there's a really heated debate out there about French cleats versus pegboards. And honestly, pick your poison. They're both great for different reasons. Pegboard is a lot better for smaller things, and French cleats are better if you have heavier objects. The tools that I don't use very frequently are tucked away, but the ones that I reach to all the time are the clamps, square, the level, the tape measure, chisels, things like that that are constantly used. And I put this shelf across the top just so that I can store my paint, my glue, stuff like that. Next, I have my Husky tool chest. And honestly, this thing works great. It's nothing fancy, it's certainly a cheaper tool chest that you can get. I got this used on Facebook for a really good deal, and I figured, hey, I need some more storage for some of my tools, and within 5 minutes, I had filled the entire thing up, and I still have need for more storage, so that's just what it's like. Before I get too far into my tools, I want to talk a little bit more about what I have hanging on the walls and why it's there. So really the overall theme of my shop is to have stuff that I use very frequently in very accessible positions. So that's why I have all of my levels, my straight edges over there, measuring equipment. And then over here I have my cross-cut sleds for my table saw. Basically anything that if I'm in the middle of the project and I just need to grab it, I'll put that on the wall, and that makes things a lot easier and less messy. So moving on from the layout of the shop, let's talk tools. So one thing you'll notice as we go through my shop is that I don't buy expensive tools. And that's primarily because I don't make any money from woodworking. Granted, I'm not calling myself a woodworker. I know, relax in the comments. More of a DIY project person, right? Although one day I'd like to be a woodworker. So yeah, you'll notice that most of my tools are either used or inexpensive brands. So my father was actually about to donate this drill press to Goodwill, and I said, hold up, I actually need a benchtop drill press. It was in really bad shape though, so I had to restore it. So I got all of the rust off, lubricated it, and gave it a nice coat of black paint. And so now it's just a great little drill press. So far I haven't really had need for a larger drill press, but this benchtop one seems to work great. So next I have this Harbor Freight combination sander. Yes, it's from Harbor Freight. Yes, it kind of sucks, but it's better to have a tool that kind of sucks but can get the job done than to not have any tool that can do the job at all. Buy a crappy tool, and if you use it enough to break it, then you can justify buying a better one. The biggest reason I bought this is because number one, it was a good price, and number two, I needed something, specifically a belt grinder for knife making. For any of you that have tried to make a knife without a belt grinder, it's really frustrating. So having this certainly speeds up the process, although one day I would love to get a 2x72, even a 2x42, something with a 2-inch wide belt that's going to remove a lot more stock and just be a lot quicker. I actually use the disc sander portion quite a bit when I'm trying to when I'm trying to round off corners or make sure that things are perfectly square. This has actually lasted longer than I expected it to. I bought this a couple years ago and for $60, and I thought it would break by now because I've used this thing a lot, but it's just chugging along. So that was a really good purchase. So next up is my table saw. Again, I don't have the budget to be rocking a Powermatic or a SawStop. So instead, I got this rigid Jobsite table saw. And to be totally honest, it's been a great saw. And overall, I would definitely recommend this table saw, but there are things to be aware of that I don't really love. The first thing is that it's not a cast iron top. Obviously, with any Jobsite table saw, you're not gonna have a cast iron top. That's just the trade-off you get. And that's also why they are a lot cheaper. But it does have 2 miter slots so that you can have a crosscut sled, and it also accepts dado blades on the arbor. So I spent $350 on this table saw, and I would definitely call that worth it. Something that Rigid did really well with this table saw is the dust collection. Even if you weren't to hook up any dust collection whatsoever, you would collect 90% of all of the dust coming off. They really did a good job of funneling that dust out that hose in the back. So let's talk really quickly about things that I don't love about this table saw. Number one is Rigid's quality control. So I have never been able to get the wobble completely out of this blade. It's subtle enough that the end product of whatever you're making is typically in pretty good shape, but if you're doing any fine woodworking, you have to account for that shift in the blade. As it wobbles back and forth, it actually cuts a wider slot than the kerf of the blade. And that's just stuff that you're gonna have to deal with if you choose to buy a $350 table saw. The second thing is that the brake on the blade doesn't always go off when I stop the saw. So most table saws have a brake so that once you turn it off, it stops in under 4 or 5 seconds, which is pretty quick. And when that brake kicks in, it does its job really well. But occasionally the brake just won't kick in at all, and it takes 20-30 seconds for that blade to stop spinning completely, and that can get dangerous. The last thing I don't love is the fence. Honestly, this fence is not bad. You probably can't expect any better than this, but you really have to make sure and check before every cut that it's running perpendicular to the blade, because sometimes it'll be ever so slightly skewed to one side. But my overall consensus for this table saw is that if you don't have one and you're looking to purchase a table saw and you don't have $2,000–3,000 for a cabinet saw, you should definitely look into a Jobsite table saw like this. Most tools you can get away with a cheaper brand like Ryobi. As you can see, most all of my tools are Ryobi. But in the case of a table saw, you might think about spending $200–300 more and getting a DeWalt Jobsite table saw. I've heard really good things about those as well. One of the most important things to keep in mind when you're working out of a small space like a one-car garage is modularity. You don't want to have all of your tools anchored down to the floor because you need to be able to move things to create space for other projects that you're doing. So working within those parameters, I designed this assembly table to fit perfectly in my space and to be able to move around. So this functions as 2 things. Number one is a miter saw station. As you can see, I keep my miter saw right here. I use a Ryobi 10-inch sliding compound bevel miter saw. And honestly, I love this thing. This thing has done great. I don't love to buy larger tools that are Ryobi. I typically love the handheld power tools, but I actually haven't had any issues with this whatsoever, and it seems to cut really well. And I actually downgraded from a 12-inch table saw to this 10-inch because I just wasn't using, I was basically never taking advantage of the 12-inch blade. And since space was a constraint, I opted for the smaller one. But one of my favorite parts about this assembly table is that this miter saw folds down completely away, and it leaves you with a totally flat surface to assemble or build whatever you want on top. And this insert goes right on top. So now it's gone from a miter saw station to a 3-foot by 6-foot assembly table that's perfectly flat. I mean, you can obviously tell I use it a bunch. One of my favorite features about this assembly table is that it has a sacrificial top. I have 2 sheets on top of this. The first layer is OSB, and the second layer is a piece of 1/2-inch MDF. And the reason I did that is because if I need to break down a sheet of plywood, all I have to do is plop it on top here and set the depth and just cut right through. So you'll notice there's a bunch of different grooves all throughout this tabletop because I break down a lot of plywood on top of this. And that's why I put in a sacrificial top. This top is secured with finish nails that are sunk halfway down the MDF so that a saw blade would never touch them. But when I want to take it off, I just have to get a pry bar and pull it off. I also take advantage of the space underneath the assembly table, and I keep all my tool bags there with tools that I don't use very often. And I also keep a tool bag here that I always have tools that I need around the house. So if I need to fix something, I can just grab that bag and go do it. I have my air compressor over here on this side, and I also have this swivel out hose. And this has about 33 feet of cord in it, and this will reach anywhere in my garage that I need it to. So I just typically keep this up against that wall, and I could be airing up my tires in the driveway even. It's a super long hose and it's super handy. And my air compressor is nothing special. It is just a 2 horsepower, 8-gallon air compressor. Well, now that I've gone over that part of my shop, let me move this car out of the way and let me show you what I have going on over there. So as you can see, when I move my wife's car out of the garage, I have a lot more space to work with. This space seems bigger than it's actually useful for. And the reason is because I can't fit enough tools on this side of the shop to even fill up the space once the car's gone. The next part of my shop I want to go over is my drill and charging station. And believe me when I say this is nothing fancy. I had some leftover 1/2-inch MDF, so I made a quick little box, threw it on the wall, and I mean, it was a quick and dirty solution, but it has served me very well. I really like it. So I use it. I have 2 battery chargers right now. I have 4 batteries, and I just keep an impact driver, a drill, and all of the bits and drill bits that I use underneath. And obviously you can't have a wood shop without a fire extinguisher. So moving over to this side of the shop, I keep a few things tucked away in the corner and up against the wall. This is really the only place in the garage that I can store any of my sheet goods. So this is typically where they live, just up against the wall. That way my wife can still park her car, get in and out comfortably, and it's not in the way. I also keep my bar clamps over in the corner, and I keep my Kreg Accu-Cut jig hung up here on the wall. This is probably the best purchase I have ever made. I love this Accu-Cut jig. It basically is a jig that turns your circular saw into a track saw, and it is incredible. And the last thing I have going on over here is my shop vac, which I keep stored in this corner. I have a dust collection system hooked up on top of it, which I made a video just a few weeks ago. I'll have a link to that just up here. And this thing is fantastic. I can wheel it around, hook it up to my table saw, hook it up to my miter saw, whatever. And this dust hopper does a great job of separating the dust so that it doesn't get into the filter and clog it up. So I highly recommend getting one of those if you're working in a small shop like I am. So the shop vac that I have is a Hart, and to be totally honest, I don't really recommend it. And I'll give you a few reasons. Number 1, the hose is small and it's a random size and it doesn't fit that many attachments. So if I need a specific attachment, I often have to go design and 3D print my own here for my own personal use. Number 2, the filter gets clogged extremely easy, which is why for me that dust stopper was a must-have. So that has been working out really well for me, and I haven't had to change out the filter ever since I got it, and I've used it quite a bit since then. And the last thing I have to say about this shop vac, and kind of the whole reason why I don't recommend it, is because it's not that much cheaper. If you were to buy a rigid shop vac versus this, you'd maybe spend $10 more, but you'd get a shop vac that is more compatible with so many more things and more reliable in general. So I don't recommend the Hart. I mean, Hart tools in general, I mean, it's a Walmart brand, you know. So that's how I feel about my shop vac. So overall, I've made my shop work out very well. I think the most important thing is to just work with what you have. I think the hardest part is that with a 1-car garage, you have walls on either side. So you have a wall here and you have a wall here as well that you can have, that you can have a French cleat system on. You can have a bunch of different storage. I mean, you could have a workbench alongside. And I understand that that makes it harder because you have a lot less space to move around here. But that's a trade-off that I actually plan on making in the future when we're looking to buy another house. We're currently looking for houses with a 3-car garage that has a 2-car garage and a separate bay for the 1-car kind of off to the side that I can use as my workshop. But at the same time, there are definitely advantages to working in this 2-car garage, even though I only get 1/2 of it to put any tools in. And I have to say that I will definitely miss being able to roll this assembly table in the middle of the garage and having a lot of extra room around the sides to work. If you have any questions about my workshop or my tools, go ahead and leave those questions in the comment section so that I can reply to those. If you're interested in any of the tools that I'm using, I'll have some Amazon affiliate links for any of them that I can find on Amazon, and I'll put those in the description so you can follow them there and purchase them if you want. If you enjoyed this video, found it helpful, or maybe inspiring for your shop, go ahead and give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That helps me out a lot. So that's it for this one. I'm Clayton, the Weekend Builder, and I'll catch you in the next one.